Man, I really wanted to like this movie, but honestly, it's just not that good.
No. It's not true. That's impossible!
Where to even begin? It has a list of plot points to get through with the most inconsistent pacing possible, and it has no time for character growth, relationship development, or fleshing out all of its characters. It felt like big chunks of the movie were missing, so there wasn't nearly enough buildup before the final act. The movie we ended up getting had plot holes, plot contrivances, simplistic underbaked plans, and a frightening lack of basic science. I will say though that there are some positives that I liked about the movie as well. The visual effects, the acting, and some of the character work were all pretty solid, but the bad far outweighs the good in my opinion. We're gonna talk about all of it, so let's just jump right in. Oh, also, just a warning, I'm about to go pretty hard on this movie, so if you really like it, maybe this isn't the video for you. Or you can just rage at me in the comments, that always helps my engagement. The first 20 to 30 minutes of the movie are actually pretty good, and I don't have any complaints about that part. The visuals are far better than what we've been seeing in the recent MCU movies. They nailed the whole 60s retro-futuristic look without it feeling overbearing or out of place. There are times where it feels like CGI overload, but mostly it adds a refreshing aesthetic that we haven't seen on the big screen before. The costume department also did a great job fitting the characters nicely into the whole setting. Right at the beginning of the movie, they take a little time to briefly show the origin story of the Fantastic Four in a convenient way without it feeling like forced exposition. Shortly after that, Sue finds out that she's pregnant, and for any comic book nerds out there, yes, the baby is Franklin Richards. So Reed immediately goes into baby prep overload, baby-proofing the whole house while he runs countless tests on Sue and the baby. Aside from checking the health of both of them, Reed is also testing for any superpowers Franklin might be born with. This will become important pretty soon. Sue is now 9 months pregnant when the Silver Surfer makes a grand entrance into the atmosphere and lands right in New York of all places. I always find it funny how everything in Marvel happens in New York. Like, you'd think that people would get the memo and just move away by now. Same shit with Gotham City, like, why the hell are you here? You can be poor elsewhere. Okay, we're just getting off topic. Silver Surfer tells them that their world has been marked for death as she heralds Galactus. While she's surfing back to space, Johnny chases after her and grabs a hold of her board. For some reason, he's able to breathe in space now, but later on they have a whole fake tension scene with Johnny running out of oxygen in space. Anyways, Silver Surfer tells Johnny something in her language, which helps Johnny eventually translate the whole language and become fluent before the third act. So with the new threat of Galactus, the Fantastic Four get busy learning whatever they can about him and the worlds he's already eaten. Again, up until this point, there haven't been any major issues. But now we have the first really bullshit decision the team makes, which is to take a 9-month pregnant Sue up to space to meet with Galactus.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Not only is this decision ridiculous on its own, but it's even worse when you realize that just before this, they showed Reed being so overly protective of Sue and the baby that he was running tests, baby-proofing the house, and having every major villain in the city on constant surveillance. Now he not only stands down when it comes to putting Sue in actual danger, but he doesn't even come up with a contingency plan in case she goes into labor while they're in space. It just makes no fucking sense until you realize that a big chunk of the plot is contingent on pregnant Sue going to space. So the whole team goes up to meet Galactus, and because they brought a pregnant Sue, Galactus senses the baby's powers and offers them a nice little trolley problem. In exchange for the baby, Galactus will let Earth live without fear of being eaten. They of course refuse the offer, Galactus induces Sue's labor, and they all head back to Earth. While on their way back, Silver Surfer attacks them but conveniently forgets how to use her phasing powers, which they established earlier in the movie. They're firing energy projectiles at her, but she chooses to dodge them instead of phasing through them, and eventually gets hit, of course. That doesn't stop her though, so they lure her into a black hole to get her off their trail. How does Silver Surfer come back from being sucked into a black hole, you might ask? Don't think about it, she just shows up back on Galactus' ship later. Oh, and that's all going on while Sue is giving birth, by the way. The movie desperately wants you to be on the edge of your seat during this part with the chaotic setting and the intense music, but I just can't be bothered to give a shit. You know they're obviously not going to crash, kill the Silver Surfer, or have Sue die during childbirth, so why is this scene taking up 10 minutes of screen time? Again, so much of this movie feels empty because of scenes like this that provide nothing to the story. They could have cut it in half and used the rest of that time actually taking a breather for some development. But no, it's just on to the next stupid decision in this nonsensical plot. The team goes straight into a press meeting to answer questions where Reed decides to tell the entire world that Galactus will spare Earth in exchange for Franklin. Why the hell would you tell billions of people that their lives, family, and world can be saved by sacrificing your infant? Of course, this ends up having zero consequences and was resolved a short while later by Sue giving a speech to Manhattan about family. Then right after this, Reed comes up with a genius plan to defeat Galactus. Now, I didn't mention this earlier, but during the first act, they had a brief scene showing Reed testing a new teleportation device that he invented. So far, the most they've been able to do is move an egg across the room from one teleporter to another. Well, now this genius of science has come up with the brilliant idea of just scaling up the teleportation device, building infrastructure for it around the world, and teleporting the Earth far away from Galactus. I guess Reed's idea is to just ignore the sun and moon being vital to life on Earth and kill humanity in his own fucked up way. Not to mention, they clearly established that the device can only teleport the egg from one teleporter to another, so where the hell are we teleporting Earth exactly? Who knows? Definitely not Reed. The last thing I'll bring up with this ridiculous plan is that Reed sees it takes so much power to move an egg a few feet that it shuts off the building's power momentarily. So to solve the energy issue, Reed enforces a worldwide energy curfew to save up energy for the teleportation. I can't believe I even have to explain this, but this isn't how power grids fucking work. You'd need the biggest battery known to man in order to store all of that electricity because that's not what power grids do. This is also ignoring the massive amount of energy they would need to save in order to move the Earth even just a few feet like the egg. I mentioned this in my reviews of Ironheart, but I'll restate it here. I don't ask that every bit of magic and technology makes perfect sense, but when they have a character who is supposed to be a genius in science and technology, I expect them to not break basic scientific principles, let alone the rules established for the technology that they built. I don't care about the flying vehicles or teleportation in the 60s or the other highly advanced technology, but when Reed Richards doesn't understand power grids or the sun and moon being vital to Earth, it feels like really lazy writing. Of course, none of this ever has to be explained though, because right before they're about to turn on the teleportation device, Silver Surfer comes back down and destroys almost all of the teleporters. If Galactus and Silver Surfer were watching Earth this whole time, why did they wait so long to attack the teleporters? Why did Galactus not attack Earth himself if he ends up doing that anyways in the third act? The only explanation is that, well, the story says that's not supposed to happen yet. In however much time has passed between meeting with Galactus and Silver Surfer destroying the teleporters, Johnny has now fully translated an alien language from one phrase that Silver Surfer gave him earlier. They don't really establish that Johnny is a genius of linguistics, but even if he was, it would take so much longer to translate than a few months with only one phrase. Of course, this translation immediately becomes important to the story because after Silver Surfer destroys a bunch of the teleporters around the world, Johnny gives her a speech about saving family, which ultimately becomes the turning point for her motivations. It's a decent moment, but it would have hit way harder if Silver Surfer had more than 10 minutes of screen time. We're going to talk about that more a little bit later. Now Silver Surfer leaves so the Fantastic Four can regroup and set up for the final act, which is somehow worse than the second act. Brilliant Reed comes up with a horrendous plan for defeating Galactus using the Manhattan teleporter that magically survived after Silver Surfer destroyed most of the other ones. Apparently she didn't think of destroying that one first since the Fantastic Four live in Manhattan, but fuck me, I guess. Their plan is to bait Galactus to the teleporter by putting Franklin in a carrier right in front of the portal, distracting him for a minute while the team swaps out Franklin's carrier for an empty one, and then having Sue push him into the portal with her force fields. So many things are wrong with this plan. First off, they know he has the ability to easily scan for Franklin and his powers, so distracting him like 3 blocks before he even gets to the teleporter gives Galactus plenty of time to rescan for Franklin. There's also still no explanation explanation as to where this teleporter is actually sending Galactus without any infrastructure on the other side, but that seems like such a small problem compared to the rest of this dogshit plan. The whole thing hinges on this ancient and insanely powerful cosmic entity being so dumb as to fall for a simple bait and switch. Silver Surfer came down to destroy most of the teleporters, so obviously Galactus knows that it's something bad, but still decides to walk straight towards it like a big dumb troll. Also, they established that he has strong telekinetic powers, so why doesn't he use them to bring Franklin to him? I just find it so frustrating when writers can't be bothered to even ask if what they're writing makes sense. Of course, Galactus soon realizes he's been tricked and starts to head towards the Fantastic Four home. Determined to save her baby, Sue magically increases her powers by 1,000 and stops the Devourer of Worlds with her force fields. Not only that, but she then proceeds to push him at least a block or two into the portal that's been held open for at least 5 minutes by now. Good thing they stocked up all that electricity on the power grid. This action takes so much out of Sue that she dies right on the spot. Luckily, Franklin has already learned the power of bringing people back to life, even though he's no more than a few months old. I know that he's supposed to have these abilities, but as an infant without any control over his powers, let alone his own conscience, I'm gonna call bullshit on that. It's just a cheap way of adding drama without wanting any consequences from said drama, and it's been overplayed at this point. Anyways, they all go back to their normal lives, and that's pretty much where the story ends. Man, there's a lot to talk about, and I want to start with the inclusion of Sue's momentary death. One of the things that so many people love about Game of Thrones was George R.R. Martin's willingness to kill off main characters. It offered more realistic tension to the action scenes because you never knew who might not come out of it. There was also significant and nuanced build-up to each death, so it never felt like cheap shock value. Unfortunately, that kind of stops after season 4 with the inclusion of overt plot armor, but it was very refreshing in the 2010s to see a story that wasn't afraid to kill its main characters. Now, I'm not saying they should have actually killed Sue because she's really important to the dynamic of the team, and I honestly think that would have pissed off a lot of people. My point is more that including a scene where she dies only to bring her back to life in a cheap and lazy way is worse than if they just didn't have her die at all. Having several minutes dedicated to Reed emotionally performing CPR on her and crying over her dead body never hits the audience because you know Sue's not gonna die, so why include scenes like this? This isn't just a complaint with this movie. I've seen this done in too many other movies, especially within the MCU. You can have stakes and tension without everything being filled with tons of plot armor and cheap drama. While there are still plenty of issues with Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, the stakes felt far more real because there were serious consequences in them. You had a strong feeling that they were going to figure out how to bring everyone back, but you also knew that Endgame was supposed to be a final chapter to the Infinity War saga, and they could absolutely kill off some of the heroes that we've been watching on screen for an entire decade. It built far more tension with the audience in between the two movies, and it paid off with both movies making over $2 billion at the box office and Endgame making $700 million more than Infinity War. Something tells me Doomsday isn't gonna quite hit those numbers. Anyways, enough about stakes and tension, let's talk about the characters and their relationships. I'll try to keep this section brief. In essence, I think they did well with some characters and not so well with others. Let's start with Reed. Reed Richards is portrayed as highly intelligent and deeply caring about humanity, but also a little emotionally detached. He's not a super charismatic and outgoing leader like Tony Stark. He's more of an introverted problem solver capable of spearheading large-scale projects. He gets his time to shine in the movie, being the one who devises and fleshes out the team's plans. The one thing I don't like about him though is that they make him into a bit of a broken man trope where he wishes his son doesn't end up like him, and it feels overdone and unoriginal at this point. Other than that, I thought it was a pretty solid writing job for Reed Richards. Benn, on the other hand, is not well written at all. The biggest problem with Benn is that he simply just doesn't have enough. First off, he has zero development. He doesn't deal with any struggles and seems to have perfectly adjusted to life as a giant boulder. You never understand how Benn feels about any of the changes that he went through, and so you never feel any connection to him. Also, Benn and Reed are supposed to be best friends since college, yet at no point do you get the feeling that they're anything more than just friendly coworkers. And it's not just the writing, it's also the lack of chemistry between the two actors. We'll discuss the acting a bit more later, but but it just never felt like Ben and Reed are actually good friends who have known each other for years. Speaking of Ben's relationships though, he also has the most underbaked romance side plot I think I've ever seen. His love interest from the comics, Alicia Masters, has about 3 minutes of screen time over the course of 2.5 scenes. It's pretty obvious that there was supposed to be a lot more, but it was left on the chopping block in post-production. What I don't understand is why they didn't just cut it out completely, because none of the scenes were actually important to the story, and it just felt out of place. Again, like Sue's death scene, the story would have just been better without it. Now let's talk about Johnny, who got a serious rebrand since the 2005 Chris Evans version. While I agree the arrogant womanizer trope is outdated, I don't like that they completely removed Johnny's charisma. He actually doesn't have much of a distinguished personality at all, mostly feeling like a generic comic relief side character. I like that he actually contributes to the team's success, but he still feels completely sidelined. His development seems like it was supposed to be about his quest for validation from the rest of the team, but it just never came full circle. There's also very little interaction between Johnny and Sue, showcasing their brother-sister relationship. Speaking of Sue, let's talk about why she's poorly written. There are definitely some great heroic traits to her, like being empathetic, kind, and strong-willed. She also serves as the emotional anchor in the team, grounding them in the difficult moments. It's a dynamic that works really well without it feeling forced or overbearing. Now, you may be asking, well, what's the problem then? That's exactly it. Sue is perfect just as she is and never has any flaws or struggles to overcome. Unlike Ben, who just wasn't given anything, Sue is given plenty of time to be fully fleshed out, and they never showcase any of her weaknesses. When she needs to unlock her powers and stop a massive celestial being from taking her child, she does just that without any problem. I'll never understand writing a character like this because there's nothing relatable about them. People identify with flawed characters because humans are inherently flawed. We want to see our characters struggle and work to overcome their issues because that's exactly how we have to deal with our own issues in the real world. Moving on to the next character though, we gotta talk about how dirty they did Silver Surfer in this film. They hired a great actress in Julia Garner to play the Herald of Galactus, and then gave her the most surface-level development possible. They rushed through the whole thing without ever showing how she deals with her conflicting emotions, and eventually reaching that turning point with Johnny Storm at the end of the second act. There's no build-up to it, and we never see her confront her feelings afterwards either. We see her get upset and abruptly leave Earth during Johnny's speech to her, and then the next time she's on screen is when she helps push Galactus the rest of the way through the portal. Silver Surfer is such a compelling character due to their morally gray nature that you can explore a lot of development with them. But we got yet another cheap iteration that failed to honor the character's story. Lastly, we have Galactus, which I guess is an improvement over the 2007 version, but still not nearly compelling enough of a villain. He suffers from the same issue as Silver Surfer, where he gets next to no screen time and forgets how to use his insanely powerful abilities when it would be most useful to him. The only things you really get to know about Galactus is that he's cursed with an insatiable hunger for planets, and he wants Franklin to help set him free. They could have delved into Galactus's tortured existence and how that plays into his motivations, but they never got anywhere near there. Overall, most of the characters just felt forgettable and underdeveloped, leaving you without any real connection to them by the end of the story. The relationships between the characters couldn't be more bland. There's a strong theme of family throughout the movie, yet the team themselves don't seem like an actual movie that has to set aside differences to work together. There's no back and forth between Johnny and Ben, and even arguments between Sue and Reed feel manufactured and easily resolved. This is maybe a little smaller gripe about the movie, but having authentic relationships in your story can really lend a lot to an audience's connection with them. Enough about the characters though, let's talk about what my experiences was seeing this in theaters. Watching this in a packed movie theater at 2 p.m. on a Thursday before the official opening meant that A, nobody there had a real job, and B, the audience is mostly superhero fans excited to see this movie. Let me tell you that there were a grand total of 8 people clapping at the end of the film. Not only that, but there were no more than 2 instances in which the audience actually laughed at a joke. I appreciate the fact that they did away with the tiresome Marvel humor in this movie, but it was replaced with generic jokes that never elicited a single laugh from me. Marvel doesn't seem to have learned that not every superhero movie has to be a comedy. I miss the superhero movies of the early 2000s where the jokes weren't ham-fisted into every other line of the script. Movies like Spider-Man and X-Men had some comic relief peppered in, but it was far and few between, leaving most of the movie to be relatively serious. It lent a lot more weight to the darker moments because you didn't feel like they were gonna be undercut by jokes at every turn. Alright, now let's move on from the humor and discuss the acting. Overall, the cast does a great job. I wasn't sure how I'd feel about Pedro Pascal as Mr. Fantastic, but he's probably the best of the three actors so far. Miles Teller was honestly just a horrible casting decision. Despite being heavily overexposed, Pedro Pascal is still an excellent actor. He also has pretty good chemistry with Vanessa Kirby, which I think is pretty obvious by the press tour for this movie. And even though their characters are not well written, I still think Joseph Quinn and Ebon-Moss Bachrach were well cast for Johnny and Ben respectively. Yes, Chris Evans and Michael Chiklis were great, but I also like these new castings. I just wish their characters were better written. Vanessa Kirby also does a fine job as Sue, bringing a quiet authority and emotional maturity to the role. Again, I still don't like how she was written, but I obviously don't blame the actress for those issues. Lastly, Julia Garner is perfectly fine as Silver Surfer, but you see so little of her that it's hard to really critique her performance. The few scenes we did get of her were well acted, but there was just not that much for her to do. Don't sleep on Julia Garner as an actress though, because she's one of the best young actresses in Hollywood right now, having already earned 3 Emmys from her role in Ozark. I find it frustrating that this movie had so much potential with a great cast behind it, and yet it couldn't have been more of a disappointment. They clearly put time and effort into trying to honor some of the characters and the visual effects, but there was so much that got pushed to the side or just straight up forgotten about. I really wonder what movie we could have gotten if they hadn't cut so much out. Buried somewhere deep under the plot holes, simplistic plans, and surface level character work is a good movie, but it just got completely lost in the editing and post-production process. I would have rather watched a nearly 3-hour movie if it meant that it was actually good, than have a generic rushed mess that does nothing to help you connect with its character. Anyways, let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you guys in the next one.